Welcome to MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 539. The program is in loving memory of Miriam Bas Eliyahu Altes Aleh Shalom and a merit of Baruch ben Yamin ben Menucha Lana Altes Yukusil ben Leah Rochel Bas Liba Farkash, dedicated by Pinchas Todres ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rochel Altes. Freilichen Chodesh Nissan, it's Rosh Chodesh today. So it's the beginning of Chodesh Hazel Lachem, the beginning of the Geula, 3,337 years ago. On this very day is when Hashem spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, telling him Chodesh Hazel Lachem, this Chodesh, and he pointed, Kazer Ev Kadesh, this new moon will be for you a new moon and renewal. And in 2 weeks from now, paraphrasing, will be the Geula Yitzias Mitzrayim. And indeed, 2 weeks later, Tezvav Nissan, Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, when the Jews, after a long, difficult exile, were finally redeemed from Mitzrayim. So we are now literally celebrating that anniversary, thousands of years, literally thousands of years. And of course, taking lessons of what that means to us. So a good place to begin is talk about Rosh Chodesh Nissan and its significance and its meaning. So, the most obvious question is, what exactly is unique? Why is this month unique? We know that this was the mitzvah given, Kiddush HaChodesh, Kiddush HaLevana. We sanctify the moon, we sanctify the new moon, the new month, every month. But when did it begin? With Rosh Chodesh Nissan, which is why Nissan is Chodesh HaRishon. We count the months, the lunar calendar, from the first month is the month when they left Egypt. So why is this month unique? And more importantly, this becomes Rishnu Lachem L'Chodshei Hashana. This will be the first to the months of the year. Specifically states that. So the simple explanation, of course, is because the redemption from Mitzrayim represents renewal, represents a new nation that was born then, that would now become an Am Yisrael, an Am Nitzchi, that would be here forever. So though they were children of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Esau, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, and all the generations, but this now was formalized. So in a sense, dedicating to that renewal, that's why Chodesh Hazel Lachem, and that's why Yisrael is Daimim L'Levana, we compare to the moon, and Meinin L'Levana, we count by the lunar calendar. So simply the message of renewal. And Chodesh comes from that word, Chidush. That's why month is called Chodesh. But when you go deeper into it, we come to learn that there are two Rosh Hashanahs essentially. We know there's Rosh Hashanah in the month of Tishrei. We know there's Rosh Hashanah in the month of Nissan. One is the beginning of the lunar year, one is the beginning of the solar year, so to speak. And Chassidus indeed explains that it's two different approaches. Tishrei is the Rosh Hashanah for Hanhagas HaTeva, for nature. And Nissan is the Rosh Hashanah for Hanhaga Nisis, miracles. In the Ten Commandments, it says, Anechi Hashem Elokecha asher yitzisichem eretz Mitzrayim. It doesn't say Asher barasi shamayim v'aretz, the one who created heaven and earth. That's a Tishrei. But Tishrei nivra elam. B'chofei el nivra elam. So even though there's an opinion that it's b'chofei adar, but Tosfos, the Arizal already are metavech, they talk about two different levels of creation. So that's the creation of nature. But when you want to talk about Anechi Hashem Elokecha, how God, besides creating nature is one thing, but that inexistent world gives us the power to be redeemed. That's even a bigger chiddush. Because the God is a creator and can create yesh ma'ayin. Only God can do that, obviously, but that's so-called obvious in a way. But that we, human beings who are already part of creation and can be enslaved, and we're mortals, and with all our limitations, can be given the power to become redeemed and freed, that's Dafkin Chodesh Nissan. And that's why we say, Asher Sichem Eretz Mitzrayim. So Nissan is, like the Medrash says, When God chose to create the world, He was conveyed to them the months of the year, the solar year. But when He chose the Yidden as a nation, then He was conveyed lehem Chodesh shel geula. So it's not just a matter of creating an existence, geula, the ability that in existence itself, we should be able to be redeemed and connected to godliness. Because to say that God can create, obviously, but that God can give us the power, that we should also experience godliness in a free way, in a geula-dika way, that's Chodesh Nissan. So Chodesh Lachem is not just the beginning of the lunar year, it's the beginning of a whole new approach to life. That each of us, you can say we're all trapped in our bodies, in a material world, with the natural laws. Everyone is bound by mitzarim v'gvulim, mitzrayim. Mitzarim v'gvulim means boundaries, constraints, limitations. The psychologically speaking, inhibitions, fears, insecurities. You can fill in all the blanks to fit it, but everybody has their limitations. Can we experience the infinite in a finite world? Can we introduce Ein Sof, something that's beyond? So till Chodesh Nissan, we didn't have that ability. And indeed, before Matan Torah, it says, El yenim leyard lamata, tachtenim leyal lamayla. That which was above the spiritual could not become material, and material matter could not become spirit. There was a schism, there was a xeta that separated them. By Matan Torah, and the beginning of Matan Torah is Yetzias Mitzrayim, to go out of the limitations of tachtenim. That tachtenim should be able to experience al yenim, that material world with all its parameters and gvulim and limitations can experience bli gvul. That would be consummated in Matan Torah because be'tziaches ha'omim Mitzrayim tavden es Elokim al harazeh. That going out of Egypt is in order to go and serve by this mountain, receiving the Torah. That came, the beginning of that, Resh Chodesh Nissan, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. And that's the Chiddush. So it's the Chiddush of, obviously, renewal in the sense, freedom from slavery, but it's a freedom deeper than just physical slavery, from all levels of limitations. That you and I, and existence itself, can connect to the highest levels of the divine infinite. The joining of the finite and the infinite, if you wish. So the question that was asked, what is the significance of the first mitzvah we were given as a nation's blessing the new moon, the month of Nissan? It's the first mitzvah. Rashi says it right in the beginning of Bereshis, that the truth is the Torah should have begun with HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. Now we understand why. Because the whole purpose of creation is to experience geula. Not to experience just that we were created. That creation itself should be able to connect to Elokus and the highest levels of the divine. As the Rebbe Rashab, the Balei Lula that we'll speak about shortly in Beis Nissan, right in the beginning of Samach Vav, asked the question, okay, God created a tzimtzum, a concealment, in order to allow existence, independent consciousness to emerge. Because before that, Ein Sof filled all of the entire expanse of reality. There was no room for anything else. No space for anything else. So the tzimtzum concealed, and then comes the kav, a ray of light that enters into this chol l'mokum panim, this empty space, so to speak, and it begins to bring some light. And the kavanah is that once there's a creation, we should then fill through our Aveda, we should expand that light to the point that we transform that very space to be a dir b'tachtenim, a home for God. So the question is, so what do we accomplish? It was that way before the creation, before the tzimtzum. So he gives two answers. The first answer is before, but it was not received by the kelim. That would be like a teacher, a brilliant teacher, but he never left space for a student, so there's no student. Here, he left space, and now that space is filled with what was there before. So the chiddush is not so much in the level of the oyer, it's the chiddush now that it can be received by the kelim. There are independent entity that now has been completely saturated with alakus, with godliness. And then he gives the second answer. In addition to that, there'll be an oyer chodesh, he says. an that wasn't even there, Lifnei Tzimtzum. Lifnei Tzimtzum, there was a measure of infinite light that did not leave room for existence. Now, through Aveda, we actually reach deeper levels, and that's the whole Hemshech Samach Vav comes to explain exactly that. What is the Chiddush that comes through Aveda B'Koyach Atzmei? So you see the word Chiddush. And indeed, there's a Maimer HaChiddush Hazeh in Samach Vav where he talks about the Aveda B'Koyach Atzmei. That brings that Chiddush. And that's the real significance of this new month, this Chodesh Nissan. What is the meaning of Nissan, the very word? So the Gemara says, Nissim Nasalei. Nissim, a Nes. Nisan is like Nissim, Nissim plural. And now we understand why. Because this is the month of transcendence. Tishrei is the month of Teva, creation and the structure of existence, which we need, obviously, Tachtonim. And Nisan is the month when you start bringing into the Tachtonim the Chiddush of an that first fills the before the Tzimtzum, and then even more than that, even a new Eiris, a new Giluim, and even the Shachas HaAtzmus itself. That's why also it says that Tishrei is the letters are backwards, Tuf, Tov, Shin. Why? And Nisan is called Chodesh Aviv. Aviv is aleph beis. So Tishrei is Mamata Lamayla Tov Shin. It goes from the last letter backwards. And Nisan is Mamayla Lamata, aleph beis, because it's Nisan. What is the difference between nissim and niflaos? So nissim means miracles, and niflaos means wonders. So in Chassidus it explains that nes is also from the word odem nisi, to lift, like a flag. Odem nisi ala odem, raising the flag on the mountains. It elevates us. Because when you have creation, that is creating existence. But how do you elevate it to states to transcend, which is actually the meaning of Pesach also, Pesach. Medalag ala hodim, mekapetz ala gvois. You lift yourself up and elevate. Niflaos, Chassidus explains, is even deeper. Is the word pella, wonder. It's even a higher level than Nes. The Rebbe spoke about it a lot, especially in the years Tov Nun, Teheshnas Nissim, and then the next Teheshnas Arenu Niflaos. It says, Ki meitzeischem eretz Mitzrayim, Arenu Niflaos. When you leave Egypt, I'll show you wonders. So Chassidus explains there's two levels, like Arich and Atik and Keser. One is above, obviously, the 10 spheres, but it's still commensurate to them. And the other is Nifla, Pella, it's completely beyond, like Atik, Netak, removed. So in that context, so one asks, it's taught the difference between Nissim and Niflaos is that a miracle happens within the laws of nature, and wonders are things above the laws of nature. Like a Nes Melubish B'Teva, and Nes L'mayla Mederech HaTeva. The truth is, Nes is also L'mayla Mederech HaTeva, but then there's levels in that itself. It seems the month of Nisan can have the word Nes for miracle in it. However, the events that happened during the Exodus this month, such as the splitting of the sea, are Niflaos, wonders above the laws of nature. I haven't seen that Befedish explicitly stated in a Maimer. It's possible that there's levels in Mitzrayim itself. From the Pasuk, Mitzrayim Aren Niflaos, seems that Mitzrayim was Nissim, and Aren Niflaos refers indeed to the Niflaos of Mitzrayim, but it could also be referring to Nun Plois, as the Tzemach Tzedek explains on that verse in Micha. Nun Plois, Nun, 50, like Shara Nun, beyond the regular Mem test structure, that indeed is even higher than the Niflaos that will be by Yetzias Mitzrayim. And this is discussed in the Maimorim, the different levels. In other words, Niflaos, even Legab the Niflaos of Yetzias Mitzrayim. So then this person asks, so how do we therefore understand why is this month named after Nissim and not after Niflaos? Nissim. So the simple answer is because Nissan's Taka, Yetzias Mitzrayim, was more the level of Nissim, and Niflaos will be primarily L'Asad Lavi. Even if you're saying Mitzrayim was also Niflaos, but it also had the level of Nissim, so it goes, which is all-encompassing. When you say one word, when you say them both, you talk about two levels, but Nissim could also include Niflaos in general context. Another question in this context. Is the work during this month initiated from above or below? So based on what we said before, it seems from above. That's the nissim, the Eibishter made nissim, and it says, "V'nigla aleim malch malchei amlochim HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'go'olam." He revealed himself and he redeemed them. And yet, like someone asks, it's usually taught that the energy of Pesach is transcendent energy inspired from above to below. Mamay lamata oviv aleph beis. But how do we reconcile that with what it says, where it says we cried out to Hashem? The Yidden cried out, Vayikra. They cried out because of the suffering of slavery, and Hashem heard us and redeemed us. Vayitzaku, and the Eibishter says, when we heard it, we say it in the Haggadah. That seems like we inspired it from where? From below to above by our crying out in prayer. So the truth is, even though there is this distinction between mamata l'mayla and mamay l'mata, but there's histalkus. Just like when you do mamata l'mayla, it also has koyach from above. So when you initiate, the mere fact that you could initiate is because God gave you the power to do so. So let's say tefillah, davening, compared to Torah, is often called mamata l'mayla. Sulam mutzav artzav v'reishim magia shamayim. Like a ladder that stands on the ground and its head, the top of the ladder goes into the sky. So you initiate your needs. But who gave you the power to pray? Who gave you the words to pray? So there's an element of mamayla lamata and mamata lamayla too. And vice versa. Even though Torah is given from above, but we know, like the Gemara says, that Purim is kimu v'kibla Yehudim, because Torah was from above. You still need that they accept it at their own volition. And the concept of learning Torah. So there's what Hashem gave us, and then he said to Moshe, Achrei rab lahates, you'll discuss it, and you paskin halacha down below. Leiba shamayim hi. So Torah also requires aveda and yigiyah. The question is, what's primary? So nissim primarily is mamay lamata. This doesn't mean there's no keli for it. Of course the people cried out. But its primary power is the Eibishter lifted them al kamfei nesharim. He took the Yidden out on the wings of eagles. And Tishrei, or Veda Mamat Lamayla, is primarily Mamat Lamayla. Then after Nisan comes Chodesh Iyar, as it's explained, Chodesh Hasheni. Now, second month, we start the work of counting the Omer, which is Aved of Birur Hamidus, refining ourselves. And then comes Chodesh HaShlishi, Sivan, which combines Mamayla Lamata of Nisan and Mamat Lamayla of Iyar. HaTeferes, Zumat and Teira Teferes, which combines Chesed and Gvura. With Chesed being Amshach Mamayla, Gvura Mamat Lamayla, like water and fire. And you need all of them. When it comes with Mamayla Lamata, it's a higher level of Gili, but it's not so integrated. When it comes with Mamat Lamayla, it's integrated, even though it may not be such a high level. But then you join them both, so you have the best of both worlds, so to speak. Then comes a question, I would put it in the category maybe a little Purim Torah, even though we're already after Purim. But someone asked us, so I said, you know what, let's read it. The question is there any credence in connecting the name of this month, Nisan that is, with an auto manufacturer by the same name? Now to read the full text, which I was wondering whether I should do, but you know what, Milsa de B'dichas is always good to open up with something that opens our minds, something humorous. If we have to buy a new car and we are undecided between choosing a Toyota, Honda, or Nissan, should we pick the Nissan because it's the same name because it being the name of a Japanese car manufacturer is also the name of the month of Geula. So maybe with a Nissan car we could have good mazel. So I don't know if I'd go that far to say that, we know there's stories that Rebbe brought, some Sefer, others, they would learn lessons even from the numbers on a car, on a train. The trains had numbers. And they would learn lessons in Avedis Hashem. Everything is a lesson in Avedis Hashem. But you have to also do this with a grain of salt, because you can start looking at, an auto manufacturer calls it by a certain name, a Japanese manufacturer. So if it reminds you, like the Rebbe Rashab said, he didn't like when people said Pshetlach and Tanya. But if it adds a Yerushalayim, didn't mind. If this adds in Yerushalayim, that when you see that auto manufacturer, it reminds you of the month of Nisan and the Aveda that you need to do, not just an Aveda al pi Agbola b'teva, but also Aveda l'mayla mederech hateva, that we behave in an efinisi, in an elevated way, transcendent way, or in the words of the Rebbe Marash, l'chadchila riber, And that the lesson you learned that when you went to lease or buy a car called a Nissan, then it brought it to Avodah B'Peil. But it's time to make connections with names and gematrias is not the derech HaTorah. It's all about our responsibility and work. So that would be the way I would respond to this. Okay. Now, from Rosh Chodesh Nissan, we go right into Beis Nissan. Beis Nissan is the Yom Hilula and histalkus of the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe. Exactly, Tofresh Pei, we're now in Tofshin Pei Hey, 105 years ago. So, let's talk about Beis Nissan and its lessons to us. So first, a little background. The Rebbe Rashab was at that point already in Rostov. He lived in Lubavitch till Tofresh Ayin Vov, but then due to World War I breaking out, he had to move more away from the border, went to Rostov. And that's where the histalkus was, and that's where there's also the oil, which later had to be moved. And Beis Nissan is that day, which as the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe, and then the Rebbe explains, the sun set, and then the sun immediately rose. It's also the beginning of the Nesius of the sixth Rebbe of Chabad, the Friedrich Rebbe. And indeed, last Maimer that the Rebbe Rashab said, Zocher Asher Oselecha Amolek is the first Maimer that the Friedrich Rebbe said. But what's unique about Beis Nissan, well, many things are unique. But we also have a documentation from Rabbi Rivkin, Rabbi Rivkin, who was a Stubbacher. He helped in the house and he was close to the family. He wrote a Shkafta de Rebbe where he describes these last days of the Rebbe Rashab's Chaim Chayuse Ba'al Medein, this world. And in graphic detail, extremely personal and very emotional. He also added notes and halacha. You also see the greatness of the Rebbe Rashab, the digduk, even in the last moments of his life, how he davened and he was following it. I mean, it's quite awesome to read. It's worthwhile reading, let's put it that way. I'm not going to read it all, obviously. It's an entire book called Ashkafta de Rebbe. But someone asked the question, what were some of the last words that Rebbe Rashab said before his histalkus? So I want to quote some of these words, just coming straight from that book. Maybe you learn things from that, the last things that Rebbe says. So I'm just selecting a few things. There's quite a few things, obviously. He asked questions, he asked the family, and he asked Beryl Rivkin to bring a Shulchan Aruch to learn the halachas, how he's supposed to daven when he's in a matzav like that, unfortunately limited. But I want to talk about some of the words. So I'm reading now, we're talking now the days before Beis Nissan. Beis Nissan then was Motzei Shabbos, is when the histalkus was. Similar to the Alter Rebbe. But the days before, and just fascinating how a Rebbe speaks. Even in a time like that, you think, and he was in deep pain, that is clear from this Shema, you see, terrible pains that he was in. So it says that after he put on tefillin, talis and tefillin, so around the hour was 2 or 3. We took him back to his room, to his bed, and he began to somewhat cough. And his son, Ben Yochid, the Friedrich Rebbe, where he writes Kveit Kedushas, or Kveit Kedushas Shlita, because he would be the next Rebbe, says to the Rebbe Rashab, to his father, Tate, did hussich? Tate, you're coughing. V'omar, and the Rebbe Rashab answered, yeah. Der Eir is sich nit misyashev bekeli. The energy is not settling into the container. That's how Rebbe answers. The Eir would be the breath, but when the keli is not in the best place, not in a healthy place, the Eir doesn't settle in. It's not smooth. It's not fluid. So right there you can have a whole farbrengen and read into that means. Obviously, it was not a good situation, but the Eir is Zichnis Mishasher in the Keli, which is such a fundamental principle in Chassidus. The Rebbe Rashab talks about it so many pages and so many Maimorim, Hemshech Hayim Beis, of course. The Eir is Zichnis Mishasher. The whole purpose of Aved is that the Eir in the Keli should be seamless, should flow, like with a healthy soul within a healthy body. If there's, God forbid, an impediment or a block, same thing in Ruchnius, that alakus should flow into our beings in a smooth and seamless way. Chet Tzadas was the first impediment that caused a disconnect, which is why it brought upon them death, or else life would have been forever, because the Eir and Keli would be connected. La'asad Love, we'll get back to that situation. So that's briefly one thing. A little later, looks like probably closer as we get closer, it says, I have to figure out the days, I'm not sure exactly what day, but it looks like this is already going toward Shabbos already. So it says around 10 o'clock, the doctors went in, but here's the thing, that the Rebbe Rashab was asleep, and suddenly, I'm translating, he suddenly woke up from his sleep, and he began to speak, Ki'ilu emed be'emtza dibure, as if he's in the middle of something, like middle of having a conversation. And we got closer to listen to his bed, to listen what he's saying. And here's the words that we heard. And I'll read exactly what he hears from the Rebbe Rashab. Wird nisbatel a bittel atzmi. He's speaking in the third person. He's becoming completely subjugated, completely nullified in a core form of suspension of self. A bittel b'mitzias. Means utterly losing his identity, becoming absorbed in something greater. A bittel shalamayla metam v'das, a super-rational bittel. Vorem asas is meir agili er atzmi, because when agili er atzmi radiates, a core energy, not a reflection, is there bittel a bittel atzmi, a bittel b'mitzias. When that radiates, the bittel is the utter bittel because it completely consumes whatever is there, a bittel mitzias. V'dosider elecha Hashem nafshi esa. That's the meaning of elecha Hashem, to you God, my soul rises. V'dosi is in Tefillah Shabbos. V'dosi is in Tefillah Shabbos. That's in the prayer of Shabbos. Was there by halten mir. That's where we're up to now. He's speaking, obviously, about himself as well, coming to the level of Shabbos. So before he was saying the Eir is Mishashav in the Keli, now it's a Eir Atzmi, so it's causing a bittel, a completely being absorbed in something greater and higher. Clearly, he's hinting to the histalkus itself. Then he says more words, but because of the difficulty hearing the language and his weakness, we couldn't really hear clearly. Rak shamano oid, we only heard this. Ahasogav is bonunus, a comprehension and a contemplation. Azer zich mizbein mit hasoga rechova, that he's contemplating with a expansive hasoga. He says, I'm not sure, Rabbi Rivkin writes, whether he said hasoga rechova or hasoga amuka, a profound comprehension or a expanded one, but it seems to me that he said hasoga rechova, expanded one. Verter mizbatel legamri, again, gets completely nullified. Und as es wird misbatel der yesh for neshama, that the yesh of the neshama, in other words, its substance, its definition, that gets suspended, that becomes nullified. The doctor then started saying it's not good for him to speak Torah because he's exerting himself, but that is not relevant to what's negated to our union. Okay, a little later, now we're talking about the night, or even the day, I would say. It says 9 o'clock. Again, they hear the Rebbe Rashab speaking. This looks like, because this is already right before the histalkus. So he's speaking. He says, we couldn't really clearly hear what? Only a few words we heard. And he says like this. Hischabrus von Yechudi Elah and Yechudi Tata. It's the only thing they heard. The joining of Yechudi Allah and Yechudi Tata. The higher unity and the lower unity. But we couldn't hear all the words he was saying. It was difficult language, and he spoke also very low. He was whispering as he was speaking to himself. So it's very hard to give commentary on this, but I want to say one thing. If you learn Hemshech Hayim Beis, which is the magnum opus of the Rebbe Rashab, the end of Hemshech Hayim Beis, though the Rebbe Rashab never ended the whole Hemshech, but the end is exactly about this. The Ischabrus of Yechudi Lo Yechudi Tata. He says the Yechudi Tata is the Bittul Hayesh, existence, recognizing that there's a creator. Ha-Yechudi Lo is Bittul Metzias. From God's perspective, there's nothing but God. And then you want the joining. You want existence itself to recognize there's nothing but God. And existence itself is part of that. So it's interesting that the Rebbe Rashab is using those words literally from the end of Hemshech Hayim Beis. Then comes, of course, the very famous statement where the Rebbe Rashab turns and says, Ich gehe in Himmel, I'm going to heaven. The Ksovim lo zechaich, and I leave you the writings. Nehmt mich, ich soll werden mit zei in einem. Take me, that I should be one with them. And he asked to be taken to the place where the manuscripts were of all the Maimorim, manuscripts of the Rabbeim. And it goes on, the Frierdiker Rebbe, when he heard that, he was utterly shocked. And when the Rebbe Rashab saw his son so disturbed, he was literally, couldn't bring himself. He says, histalkus, excitement, you're getting all worked up, so to speak. Meichin, intellect, self-control. Then he goes on that after that, the Rebbe Frierdiker Rebbe was quiet. He didn't see any movement. He controlled himself. And then he goes on to talk about the last minutes, which you can look up yourself. Quite moving, very moving. What could I say? One thing I would want to mention, that literally minutes before the histalkus, the Frierdiker Rebbe asked everybody to leave the room because he saw that Rebbe Rashab wanted to bless them. He blessed the Frierdiker Rebbe, then he blessed his three daughters. With a Yivarechacha, put his hand on their head, above their head, said their names, and blessed them with Yivarechacha. Very, very, what can I say? It's quite heart-wrenching to read this. How Rebbe returns his neshama. So here we are, Beis Nissan, recreating or remembering what happened then. And it's not meant just as an interesting story. It's all about, obviously, it's lessons to us. So those are some of the last words of the Rebbe Rashab. What lessons can we draw from the Rebbe Rashab to help us navigate today's challenges and turmoils, as somebody asks? So firstly, just from these words, you have a tremendous lessons. The Rebbe Rashab was kol kulei, his entire being was about bringing godliness into this world. And everything, a cough. Even in his sleep, what is he thinking about? What is he saying? What is his essence? It's all about Yechudi Lo, Yechudi Tata, and the Yichud, and uniting them both. About seeing the Eiris and the Kelim, Ha'er Atzmi, the Bittul HaMetzias, Bittul of the Yesh of the Neshama. The fact that we know what the Rebbe Rashab said tells us how one's to live their life, how one is to live their lives. It's not about me and you and our petty or not so petty affairs. It's about what we're doing to bring God in this world, beginning with ourselves. And that's what the Rebbe Rashab teaches us. All the Rabbeim teach us. All Torah teaches us. But we're talking about Beis Nissan. And indeed, that's what the Rebbe Rashab did with his Maimonides Chassidus, called the Rambam of Chassidus. He brought Chassidus in a way that could be understood. The Rebbe once said that you can't really understand Chassidus without the Rebbe Rashab. Of course you can understand Chassidus from the Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe, but in its fullest glory, especially the two famous Hemshechim, Ay Samach Vav and Ayin Beis, that I mentioned. The Rebbe Rashab established Hemchit Mimim, established a training ground for bringing Chassidus, aleph, to the world. which is essentially where this is the training for the Bochim, Kol HaYetzel L'Mechames Beis David, the soldiers of Beis David, of the house of David, to what? To fight the war, the spiritual war, against ignorance, against assimilation, against those that don't understand or refuse to understand what Mashiach is. So the Rebbe Rashab really empowers us on all challenges, and especially the challenges today. There are wars being fought, physical wars, but there's also spiritual war that each of us is obligated today. There's a fire burning, the fire of ignorance, the fire of assimilation, the fire of people not understanding the relevance of Torah, of mitzvahs. Pesach is coming, making sure that every Jew is reached and inspired. And for that matter, it goes also to every non-Jew. The message of God to every human being on this earth. Okay. So now let's move. This week is also Parshas Vayikra. So let's talk a little about Parshas Vayikra. It's the new Sefer, Shlishi, the third book of Torah. After Pekudei, we go to Vayikra. So Vayikra, if you want to connect it, it's very clearly connected. It says Vayikra al Moshe. It doesn't say who called Moshe. The Alter Rebbe talks about it in Likutei Torah. Because they're talking about Atzmus that's higher than any name. So you don't say Vayikra Hashem el Moshe, even though Havaya is Shema Etzem and Shema Miyuchad, Shema Mefurish. It's not just one of the 7 holy names, it's the holiest of them. Yet it's still a name. And there's a level of Anochi Le'Yisram as Le'B'Shum Eis Le'B'Shum Kates. God himself, Vayikra el Moshe. And we're in the Mishkan. Total bittul mitzvahs. Even to the point that you don't even have a gili or a tziyur or a structure. In other words, not as God is in structure, God beyond structure. Which of course therefore fits to the message of Nissan, the message of Beis Nissan. A gili that's higher than histalkus, a gili that's higher than all structure. And that's to Moshe. And what does he say? Odom ki yakrim mikem korban la'Hashem. As the Alter Rebbe teaches, why does it say Odom mikem ki yakrim? When a person among you says Odom ki yakrim mikem, because the hakrav is you. You're being makriv your nefesh habamis, your guf, your physical yesh. To what? Like we said, to alakus. And that's why the whole Sefer Vayikra is called Sefer Karbonis. So when we ask what is the central theme of this week's Torah chapter, the beginning of the Sefer Karbonis, Teras Kehanim sometimes it's called. And it's all the halachas around the Mishkan, around Karbonis. These are all the halachas that were said when Rosh Chodesh Nissan. It began Rosh Chodesh Nissan because that's when the Mishkan was finished. And that's when all these halachas were said. All this will go all the way until Pasha Ba'alescha, when they continue their journey through the Midbar. So the Sefer Vayikra is all about Karbonos from Lashon Kiruv, lessons to us. But before we get to that, let's ask the other question. Why does Vayikra have a small aleph? As somebody wrote. Wouldn't having a small mem, shin, or hey seem more appropriate? Also, why have a small letter that hints to Moshe's humility in Parshas Vayikra when Moshe is mentioned all over the last 4 books of the Torah? It seems like a random spot, but nothing in the Torah is random. Wouldn't it make sense to have the small letter the last time that the Torah mentions Moshe, signifying that throughout his whole leadership he remains humble? Well, this is discussed. The Rebbe speaks about the small aleph of Vayikra. So the first thing is, yes, absolutely humility. The aleph. And why aleph? Very obvious. It's the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Everything begins with the aleph, with the pronunciation of the aleph. So it's reflecting a level of total bittul. We talked about bittul betachlis, bittul b'mitzias. Moshe Ya'anov, he was the humblest. And even by Hashem, we don't have Hashem's name. So Moshe for sure, meaning because it's higher than any gili, any tzir, any shape and form, any structure, any definition. So the aleph is all. How do you get to a place that's beyond definition? You yourself have to lose your definition. So, and hence the aleph zeira, the small aleph. Why here? Very clear. Because this is the first time we're talking about Adam Kiyakin Mekem. This is the whole Aveda of Adam. Beginning of Avedas Adam. So it's true, the first mitzvah is Chodesh Lachem. But Aveda saw them. Aveda. And what's Aveda? That's karbonis, and tefillah became karbonis, tefillah. The Avedas are karbonis. That's why it's called Sefer Aveda in the Rambam. The service. And what's Aveda from the word Ibud? Basically, it's bittul. The aleph is the Eira, the small aleph. So what personal and global lessons does it offer for our times? Well, in addition to what we said before about chidush, that when a person focuses not on themselves, but on the purpose of their lives, their mission, you make yourself a small aleph. And your whole being is Odin Kiyakin Mekem Korban Hashem, is to be a Korban Hashem. Ani Nevresi L'Shamash Eskenu, Ani Le Nevresi El L'Shamash Eskenu, which is even stronger. That your whole being is to be a channel, a transparent vehicle, a transparent instrument of the divine in this world to transform the world. So Kiruv, you getting closer to God and elevating all of existence, and even the behemoth, like he speaks about the different levels of the behemoth, the animal soul, is also being elevated. As he discusses at length in the Maimer of Basel Legani, Tovshin Yud, which was the last Maimer published from the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the first Maimer that the Rebbe said 74 years ago, to be exact. So that's the whole Aveda of a person. And that helps us both in our personal lives and globally, because that's how you succeed. If you want to really succeed, you need to connect to something greater than yourself. The bittul that we've been talking about. Okay. Let us now go over many questions have come in regarding Pesach, which is being in 2 weeks. And I'm going to break it down because we still have a program next Sunday, and then the following one, the week before Pesach. So more Pesach-related things I'll speak about in those programs. But here we'll talk about pre-Pesach. So in a sense, we already start preparing ourselves 30 days before the Chag, which was Tezvav Adar, and especially, according to all the opinions, 2 weeks before the Chag. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, 2 weeks, which is mamish now. This year Pesach is Motzei Shabbos. Erev Shabbos is on Pesach. So we're literally 2 weeks, 2 weeks minus a day before Pesach. So we'll call this a pre-Pesach section. And so I broke it down into different questions. So let's start with this. A little more personal ways of how we prepare for Pesach. And just as a somewhat of introduction, as you know, this program is dedicated to speaking everything openly and candidly. That no questions are taboo, nothing's off limits, everything can be asked, and indeed people do ask everything, especially being that it's anonymous. Good opportunity to announce it. Go to chassidusapply.com if you want to submit any question, and completely anonymously, it cannot be traced. chassidusapply.com. There you can also find all the previous archives of these programs, plus other resources. So, question number 1. Is Pesach meant to be a dreaded holiday filled with extreme stringencies? And I've received this year, and definitely previous years, many questions phrased differently, but the same idea. People write, I've experienced Pesach always as this overwhelming holiday, the guilt, all these chumras, another word for stringencies, and to the point that you feel like it loses its spirit, its joy. Where's the joy? Where's the beauty? Someone even writes, it actually traumatized me as a child, and I could see it traumatizing generations, using one of the catchwords of our time, trauma. So let's answer it directly. Unfortunately, this is a stereotype, but not all stereotypes are myths. The myth is it's not true, but it doesn't mean that people don't experience it this way. that unfortunately many people see religion in general, especially Pesach, that may be the extreme of all the days of the year, as being very dogmatic, ritual-based, with a very little spirit in it. To the point, yes, it could be something that's dreaded. I've heard from many people, sadly, that they dread in general all holidays, because that was a day when they were punished if they didn't behave properly. As one person told me, my father, who was an angry man, was the angriest at holidays and Shabbos, and he took it out on us. So there's a lot of dysfunctionality that has been so-called covered up in the name of religion, to the point that it's created an image, an impression for many, that that's what religion is. It's not just sad, it's tragic, because it's so far from the truth. The Rebbe would often say, there's a Ma'am Chazal in Yerushalmi, Imreiku mekemhu. You have a question, there's something missing, a vacuum. So the easiest thing is just to blame everyone else, to blame how it was, what was given to you. Mikemhu. If it's empty, means something missing in you. The way Torah was taught, unfortunately, I wouldn't even call it Torah, in a distorted way that creates such an impression, means there's something really wrong. Hashem created this world. Hashem is etzem hatev, teva hatev lehetiv, the utter goodness. Everything good in existence is because God is good. Torah is called Torah's chesed, a Torah of love. The whole Torah was given just to create peace in this world. So how is it even possible that someone could take Torah or mitzvahs and say it does the opposite, creates discord, divisiveness, anger, guilt, causes people to dread it? And indeed, that's true. There are people, that was their experience, and many ran the other way. And the way, whenever I meet someone like that, and I unfortunately meet many people like that, I don't invalidate their experience, because that's what happened. I say to them, that's not Judaism, that's real Judaism. You were given a false Judaism. It was hijacked by unhealthy people or ignorant people, whether intentional or not intentional. Pesach, most beautiful, all holidays, but the most beautiful holiday, it's a holiday to experience transcendence, freedom. The exact opposite. That should not terrify anyone. No one should be dreaded. No one should dread that. The ability to emancipate yourself from your own limitations, your own inhibitions, fears, and even your own traumas. Pesach is the exact opposite. It's freedom of trauma. Mitzarim v'gvulim. Mitzrayim goes on Mitzarim v'gvulim. All the limitations, anything that constrains you, anything that terrifies you, anything that causes you to feel insecure or inhibited. Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's all about the children, teaching children to ask questions, not to be silenced, validating them, bringing out their best. Now, truth must be told, many people will say, yes, my Pesach has been a beautiful Pesach. I, for example, grew up with Pesach, my family, and it was very nurturing and very loving. Yes, I had some family members that were very dogmatic and very extreme, but it was not the only thing I experienced. I also experienced a lot of the beauty, so I was able to find my way. But I know people, yes, for them Pesach is terrifying. There are people today will not go to a Seder because of their negative experiences. But the problem is not with the Seder or the Pesach. The problem is the way people presented it, misrepresented it. I would say even abused it. We must know this and we must teach it to everyone we speak to. Obviously, the most important thing is to teach our children and make a Seder that is so beautiful and uplifting that they never have this question. But for anyone that you meet that does have this, the answer has to be, let me show you what Pesach is. Literally just yesterday, talking to an older couple who they mostly don't really know what Pesach is, but the little they do know was always either a joke or irrelevant, but definitely not. And I shared with them that it's all about your limitations. You have to see their reaction. Like young children, they couldn't believe it. Jews. But it's not surprising, because is this taught in our schools? Is it taught to most Jewish children? So we have a gift, and we have a responsibility, and that's why I'm elaborating on this. The next question, why and when did the Seder become a mechanical ritual for so many Jews? Or as someone put it this way, At what era in Jewish history did the Seder go from being a fun family experience commemorating the exodus from slavery to a punitive, overbearing, strict, ritual-obsessed 10-hour army boot camp training program with a lack of empathy and humanity and the polar opposite of what freedom represents? Quite verbose and articulate, but everyone is entitled to express themselves. And this is, unfortunately, I've heard it more from more than one person. So it's the same spirit of what we spoke about. I don't know when exactly, but something happened. Maybe that's part of Golus. Over the years, you start doing things by rote and mechanically, and it loses its neshama. Maybe that's why the Baal Shem Tov came to this world. We know that before that, that's why he's called Yisrael, because before that, the Jews were in a comatose, spiritually comatose state. They were observant. They committed. But sometimes you start losing the lachluchis, as they call the moisture, the spirit, the joy. And Baal Shem Tov taught about simcha. So it says it came to revive. You call someone by name who's in a coma, it wakes them up. Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. Yisrael is the general name of Klal Yisrael. Chassidus came to reintroduce, not new. It was always in the Shmasa Daraisa, and Jews always knew it. Didn't have to always be articulated. There was a time where you picked it up simply from the smell of the chicken soup in your grandmother's kitchen. But the world has changed. We no longer live in the spirit of our grandmother's kitchen. We're no longer in a shtetl where the people you know in your life are just a few people that you're born and you die in the same town. Environment of Yerushalayim. Things changed. This can require a longer analysis, but all this change has caused a situation that Golus is much more than just being exiled from our land and from our Beis Hamikdash. It's also Golus Pnimi. It's a dissonance, religious dissonance, where religion becomes ritualistic, mechanical, by rote, robotic. And we know, tefillah, b'lei kavana, the shalah, others write, a tefillah, prayer without intention is called, you know what it's called? A guf b'lei neshama, a body without a soul. You know what that's called? That's called a corpse. Lifeless, dead. Sorry for using such morbid terms, but that's what it is, beruchnius. So you can do something in a dry way, without any passion, without any chayas and energy and vitality. This is our job, is to turn a Seder and turn Pesach into alive, that you should be excited. Not just do it because everyone's doing it, or you know what, I'll make my family happy. But you see it as an opportunity, a once-in-a-year opportunity, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, to experience true emancipation, not just begashmis, but beruchnis, psychologically, emotionally. Everything that people go to for therapy or they medicate themselves or whatever it is that you're looking for, that's what Pesach was meant to bring to you in a healthy way. So how can we rejuvenate the Pesach experience into a personally relevant and exciting experience? That's why we prepare 30 days before the Yom Tov, 2 weeks before the Yom Tov. The more you prepare, the better it is. So practically speaking, we can do this with our children, with ourselves, to read, to prepare that we come to the Seder. Let's open up the Seder in a new way. Before we start the Seder, let's remember what is Yitzias Mitzrayim, Mitzarim v'Gvulim. Every one of us has a Mitzvah v'Gvul. We have our limitations. Identify something you want to free yourself of. A bad habit, mistakes you made, fears you may have, different inhibitions. And then use Pesach as a journey, a 15-step journey toward transformation, a 15-step journey toward liberation and freedom. And every detail of the 15 steps of the Haggadah are meant to do that. That's why it says, "B'chol der v'der chayav adam lirasas atzmei kilu hu yotzim b'Mitzrayim." In every generation, we have to envision as we left Mitzrayim. The Alter Rebbe adds "B'chol yom v'yom," every day. But we never were in physical Egypt, many of us, most of us. But it means Mitzarim v'Gvulim. You have to constantly envision Mitzarim v'Gvulim of your life today and find a way to and look at the Pesach as the tools and instruments and skills to help us achieve that. One of the ways, engage the children. Let them ask questions. That frees them. That allows them not to be silent, but to be engaged, to be interactive. And the same thing with all the other parts of Pesach. I have at meaningfullife.com a whole series of resources, literally every step of the Seder, 15 steps, and the specifics, matzah and morer and the wine and so on, how it's all part of tools, literally, that help us on this journey. So we're obligated to make a Pesach in that way. And especially if you have guests, to make sure that their experience is memorable, because it's relevant, personally relevant. That's the operative word. So let's address one more thing regarding Pesach. What can I do to avoid conflicts with my spouse who keeps adding more draconian Pesach chumras, traumatizing our family? And here's how the person writes it. My wife and I made an agreement years ago that in order to clean and get ready for Pesach, after Purim, we would only eat in the kitchen and not bring food into the home. Food around the house, I should say. That's a fair agreement. But every year she adds new things that are ridiculous and not based on halacha. Last year she was like a TSA officer at the airport, making everyone stand with their arms stretched out as she went over everyone's clothes with a handheld vacuum before they could leave the kitchen after a meal. This year she decided that's not good enough, and she makes everyone go outside on the porch as she blows an industrial strength making me laugh, leaf blower on our clothes in case a crumb was on them. The wind from this machine is so strong, it knocked over our 3-year-old daughter and she hit her head, and we had to take her to urgent care to get stitches. I was so angry, I yelled at my wife and said, what you're doing is not halacha. It is severe mental illness and you need to be hospitalized in the Kings County G building. She doesn't understand what she's doing is harmful and wrong. I think I know why a large group of the Yam Suf voted to go back to Egypt. Probably they wanted to get away from their wives, who forced them to brush their teeth with sandpaper to remove any chametz. What can we husbands do to avoid these conflicts every Pesach, which not only takes the enjoyment out of a beautiful Yom Tov, but also does the opposite of the spirit of the Yom Tov, which is supposed to be freedom? And this obsessive compulsive disorder in the name of Hashem is traumatizing generations of children of whom some will grow up to despise the religion. Okay, very dramatic, and I hope it's not exaggerated, but the point is well taken. And frankly, I've also heard the opposite. Sometimes it's the husband that does that to the rest of the family. So let's not make this a woman's thing or a man's thing. But this is a perfect example of what we've been talking about. It's a Pesach that's not godly. If indeed, I'm assuming everything here is exactly as you're describing it. Pesach is meant to be a freeing thing. Now, obviously there are halachas to clean your house for chametz. I remember growing up, my mother, my grandmother, cleaning for every crumb. I used to ask why. You get older, you start realizing chametz is the concept of yeshus, arrogance. You want to eliminate every... So it's symbolic in that sense. It's also Torah says, chametz, you shouldn't have chametz. But if the OCD is more powerful than the godliness in it, we have got a problem. Because that's avodah zarah, basically. You're worshipping the thing as a thing in itself. You have to remember the cleaning out for chametz and the eating of matzah is all about bittul. It's all about experiencing bittul. Not more yeshus, and definitely not more extremes. And if it's not coming with love, and it's not engendering and perpetuating love, there's a problem. That's like people who love God, but they hate human beings. So the Alter Rebbe already told us, if you love God, you have to love what God loves, His children. You can't love the Father and not love the children. The whole Torah is based on Ahavas Yisrael. As Hillel said, Kol HaTorah Kulihi. Everything else is commentary. Klal Gadol B'Torah, Rabbi Akiva says. And V'ahavta Lecha Kamecha. Now, how to deal with this? I don't know if I would have agreed that you call it mental illness, but I can understand if this is all correct. She pushed you over the edge. So I think you should apologize for that if the husband is listening to this, to find loving ways to correct this. Now, if someone is actually suffering from real OCD or mental illness, that has to be addressed in the proper way. But I think this is more of an education. Classes should be given, talks. And I'm saying this to mashpim and to rabbonim and to educators, mechanchim, mechanches. We have to teach, and that's what Chassidus does. Chassidus comes and brings the neshama into the picture. Explain why we clean for Pesach in this way. Make it in a way that your children and your husband or your wife will love to keep Pesach, and you don't have to tell it to them, and you don't have to vacuum them. They themselves want to free themselves of anything that's negative. The mere fact you have to do that tells you that, now what, you are the policeman? You are appointed to do that? Inspire. You're really committed. You learn something, another chumra, another stringency. Teach, educate, inspire. Show how it's important. Not just this type of dogmatic behavior that can be quite destructive. Absolutely. Another question came in, which is a similar one, the other way around. But that I think I'm going to leave for next week. But I want to be Messiah B'Tev. You always have to end with something positive. Pesach is coming. Like I said, 3,337th Pesach since the Jews left Mitzrayim. We're here as a people because of Pesach. That's when we became a nation. We were forged into a nation. Interesting, it came from pain and suffering. But it forged us into a beautiful nation. A nation of love. Hazerim bedima, berina yaktseda. Yes, we sowed, we planted with tears, but the tears became raindrops that nurtured the seeds of growth and of beauty. And we're a nation today with the most beautiful values. All the values the world cherishes come from Judaism. And it all began with Yetzias Mitzrayim. And as the Bab Maharal writes, that once Yetzias Mitzrayim happened, Jews could never be avodim anymore. Not just physically, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. They're free. Avodei atem v'lo avodim la'avodim. You're my servants, God says. You're not servants to my servants. 3,337 years. 50 days after Yetzias Mitzrayim, they received the mandate of God, the divine mandate called the Torah. And ever since we have been this nation, ma'at l'kol ha'amim, atem ma'at l'kol ha'amim, fewest in number, but in quality, look what we've done. So there's something to be proud of as we enter into Pesach. And we have to teach that pride to ourselves, to our children. Pesach is all about the children. V'gada to levincha. That's why it's called Haggadah. Kan haben shoyel ma. The engaging, the dialogue, the eliciting, changing things in order to provoke children to ask questions. So it's a beautiful Yom Tov, an opportunity to literally transform lives and teach us how to celebrate Yiddishkeit with love, with beauty, with warmth. That is how we should be preparing for Pesach. Individually, family-wise, collectively. So yes, there are many things you want to learn. The children learn the firkashas by heart. But imagine you could add another dimension where they feel... Now children by nature are excited. They're excited even by mechanical things, frankly. But imagine if you could also add a Chassidish spirit to it, a ruach. These are life-changing experiences that shape and change what those children will experience and what they will do when they grow into adults and have their own children. And definitely avoid and prevent some of the more nightmare stories. Some of them we talked about, some we didn't. The main thing is, we should all have a freilich and Chodesh nissim. B'nissan nigalu, b'nissan asidin legoyel. In nissim we were redeemed and we will be redeemed. So long before Pesach comes, we should already have the geula. A kosher and freilich and Pesach should be a Pesach already, the Shana Haba Yerushalayim. As the Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe teaches that Mashiach comes now, when Yerushalayim automatically will be Shana Haba Yerushalayim. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied. And as I said, we'll continue discussions, pre-Pesach discussions, every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Everyone have a good Chodesh, a freilich and Chodesh, a geula dike Chodesh.
This program is brought to you by MyLife Chassidus Applied. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at chassidusapply.com/donate.